Welcome, colleagues. Good late afternoon, and welcome to members of Cabinet, Deputy Cabinet members and Commissioners and officers to another formal meeting of the Cabinet, and also welcome to members of the press and any members of the public that may well be watching us live via the Council's YouTube platform. So welcome to everyone watching via the live stream. And just to advise, as per usual, councillors, members of the Cabinet unable to join the meeting in person, but who are able to join remotely will not be able to present an item if their name is on an item that we're considering today. They won't be able to move or second a motion or vote, but whilst they'll be able to observe and under my discretion as chair, I'm happy to invite them to participate in some of the border debates. Their attendance won't be officially recorded. With regards to meeting etiquette, but I just ask that for all members of the Cabinet and the wider executive who are here that wish to speak on any matter that we're going to be considering today, if you could raise your hand and then just introduce yourself for the purposes of members of the public and press that may be watching via YouTube. And for those that may be on Zoom, I'll be asking Clerk to the committee to advise me if there are any members that wish to participate in the discussions on an agenda item. And just to conclude, we've got a relatively substantive agenda, not necessarily in terms of numbers of a number of reports that are of substantive nature. So I'll try to give as much time as possible for debate and any questions that colleagues may have. So on that note, I'm going to commence with the agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence. Joy, who is clerk to the committee, could you kindly advise if there are any formal apologies for absence that you've received?
We've received apologies for absence from Charlene McLean and Luke Charters.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other apologies that I need to note from any colleagues here?
Councillor Asa for lateness.
Okay.
Councillor Darwood, who's away.
Okay. Thank you very much. And then can I just draw Cabinet members' attention to the declarations of interest which are covered across pages 7 and 8. And it's just really the point at which all members of Cabinet only, because you'll be the principal decision makers alongside me across the Cabinet reports, if there are any disclosable pecuniary interests or non-pecuniary interests as they pertain to any of the agenda items that we are going to be considering today. Are there any? Okay, that's a no, Joy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then can I similarly just draw your attention to the minutes as presented across pages 9 and 220. These are minutes pertaining to decisions of Cabinet made on the 22nd of September. And can I ask that we note these as an accurate record? Is that noted?
Noted, Chair.
Brilliant. On agenda item 4, appointments to outside bodies. There are no appointments to outside bodies to be announced today. And on that note, we can jump into the first agenda item, which is the overall financial position Q2 of the Council for financial year 2022 to 2023. I'm going to be inviting Councillor Zulfikar Ali alongside Corporate Director Conrad Hall and Andrew Ward, if he's on Zoom, to talk to this item. And if you would indulge me, oh, you're here even, sorry. I missed you completely. That is not any suggestion or indication of nondescript nature of accountants or finance people. at all, because you're very effervescent and exciting. I'm just blind.
Yes.
I just wanted to say a few words. Look, this financial position report for Q2 comes at a time of great challenge for all local authorities, not least Newham Council. All of us are acutely alert to the cost of living crisis that is facing the residents and households in Newham, along with the inflationary pressures that all businesses and organisations are facing. Newham Council is not immune, and that will be something no doubt will be a consistent theme across all of the contributions that we'll be hearing, starting from the cabinet lead. And I would just really ask that all members of cabinet and the wider executive listen intently, because this is very much informs some of the really important decisions that we're going to need to take in as we progress towards setting our financial budget plan for the next 3 years over the coming months. So on that note, I will pass over to Councillor Zulfikar Ali and invite you to introduce this paper.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues will recall the Q1 budget monitoring report, which we presented to you back in July this year as part of finance review. This report is the next update of Q2. And I say at the outset that this is giving you the latest position where we are with respect to the current finances of the council. It makes a number of suggestions and proposals for consideration. And may I say at this stage that those suggestions and proposals will be subject of further report to the cabinet on 1st of November. That will be the decision item at the time. But may I also say that in the absence of the government's indication as to how they intend to fund local government, it is very, very difficult and challenging to come up with any estimation at this stage. However, we are looking forward to the new Chancellor's autumn statement. We were expecting it on 31st of this month. It has now been delayed to the 17th of November. And let's hope that it brings some more positive news, which may help us to review what is in this report and what may be coming in future in Q2 and later on. And in terms of Q1, you may recall we highlighted a number of unknowns which are posing significant financial risks to the council. And we are indeed in a very unprecedented situation. The lack of clarity, as I said earlier, on part of the government is making life very difficult for local authority. And the worsening economic conditions, continually rising inflation, which has now exceeded over 10%, and the rise in energy costs, cost of living, these are all major challenges that we are facing as an authority. Ultimately, we have fixed amount of budget. Question is, how do we divvy it up to fund the services which are essential, statutory, and others which are our aspirations? So, as I said earlier, Chair, that the government failed to actually deliver anything other than getting 3 prime ministers and 4 chancellors in the current year. But based on what we've seen, it looks very difficult to see how they're going to come up with. However, we will keep an eye on what they come up with in terms of our colleagues with LGA, as well as in the London Council, to see what impact any government proposals will have on future funding of the local government. In terms of this report, Chair, this presents you with the current Q2 budget monitoring and the financial impact in different areas. You will note in the report that the biggest pressures are in the temporary accommodation. 5.2 million is currently what's been forecast as an overspend. Again, this is a national issue. Clearly, the government has failed to properly fund this service area, and the local authorities like us are having to make sure that we use our limited resources to meet dignity and respect for the people who live in this borough. So 5.2 comes from the temporary accommodation cost. Rest of the 2.6 is made up of service demand in social care and children's area. And also there is some reduction in income, particularly in the parking area due to national difficulties and the economic situation. So in total, we have a situation whereby 7.8 million is the overspend that is being forecast in this report. So we know that there's been a general price increase, the inflation has gone up, and the contingencies that budget we've had for this purposes, these have been allocated for energy costs, the fuel costs. Clearly, the services have to be provided, and we made sure that these contingency sums are used adequately, properly to fund the essential services, which has been done. And I do know that recently we added 0.9 million into street lighting because energy costs are going up. So across the council, I know the CMT and the cabinet leads are working extremely hard to make sure that we contain the overspend. We do have a very good track record in the past where we have introduced in-year management action, which has resulted in substantial saving. And that is something that we will continue to do. What I will do now is I'll ask Conrad or Andrew to add a few things in terms of what may be on the horizon and anything else they wish to bring to our attention.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. Chair, if I may, I'll just spend a couple of minutes adding to and amplifying a little bit of the context that's been provided there. I'll then hand over to Andrew just to walk you through some more of the detail in the report. The report, of course, deals with the financial position as we find it at the end of Q2, and it is to that extent factual. Of course, it's impossible to separate that from the wider context in which we're all operating and has been set out. There's been, I think I can fairly describe it as a fair amount of political turmoil nationally recently, and that was taking place against an existing background of high inflation at rates that we've not seen for many, many years and rising interest rates. I think, as has been said, we still have no real information, no hard data that I can provide to you because it's not been provided to us about exactly what the position will look like for future years. Hopefully, if the government is now sort of settling back down perhaps to ordinary business, that will start to come out and has been set out. Now anticipating the financial statement on the 17th of November rather than the 31st of October, as was previously advertised. I think it is important to stress that, in my view, it's really rather unlikely that on the 17th of November we will have sufficient detail to know exactly what Newham's financial position for next year will look like. I think the most we can expect is a sort of overall position for local government, with perhaps some indications as to distribution. It may be sometime after there before we have the precise numbers to work with ourselves. And that, of course, is challenging in itself for our own budget setting cycle, but we'll work through that. I think also, regretfully, it is difficult to be optimistic about what will be in that settlement. The language of government, and again, I stress, this is not backed up yet by the sort of hard data that one would really want, but the language of government has clearly been to signal potential cuts to public expenditure. And just to contextualise that, at this time last year, thereabouts, in the financial statement, local government was promised real terms increases in funding. And that was delivered this year based on inflation as it was last October at around about 6%. We had a tiny fraction more than that as a sector. Clearly, if the spirit of that was to be retained, our funding settlement next year would see an inflation increase of, let us say, 10% or there or thereabouts, the latest position when it is finalised. I think, given the language of government about reductions to public expenditure, given what is clearly a challenging situation for the public finances nationally, I think it is unlikely, perhaps very unlikely, that we would see an increase at that rate. To be honest, even if we saw a 6% rise, as was set out this time last year, that might be certainly a better outcome than some of the worst cases we have projected. And of course, the 6% rise in our funding would be a real terms cut which would therefore face presenters with some challenging decisions. So it's important to see the current year position against that really tough background for public finances generally and local authorities as part of that. And clearly we can and we must do everything that we can to reduce the pressures reported by way of this report as much as we are able to this year. I think it is important to emphasise in that, and the report does draw out that we have significant pressures in temporary accommodation, which I think will be difficult to mitigate in the very short term. There is a tremendous amount of action going on there to deal with that over the longer term, but that's not a cost pressure that can be reduced very dramatically in year. And so everything that can be done in order to reduce the pressure on other budgets will be important, because that will put us in a stronger financial position than we otherwise would have been, and hence give us that little bit more resilience to deal with what is undoubtedly, very likely in my view, to be an extremely challenging public funding round. So, I'm sorry if that sounds perhaps a little bit bleak, and indeed I do emphasise we do not know about next year's funding, so we are still waiting announcements on that. But I think it's right to kind of emphasise it is that will be a particularly challenging round. That's all right then, Chair. I'll hand over to Andrew, who'll just highlight some of the key points from the report that you have in front of you as well, and then we move to the debate. But I thought it was important to contextualise it that way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So as Ali set out, this does follow the July finance review, and the budget monitoring report contained within that did indeed highlight the financial risks facing the council at that point in time. And it's really clear that the economic conditions bad then have worsened since. And I think that can probably be seen really clearly if you look at section 6, which is which deals with the temporary accommodation forecast, and that's a worse position of around about £2 million than that indicated in the narrative of the July finance review. And the reasons for that are much discussed, but essentially we have higher demand for temporary accommodation from households, and we're getting a restrictive supply of homes available to rent in local markets. So that has increased prices significantly. So higher demand and higher prices are a really difficult financial position to manage. So we're also seeing the impact of inflation and the cost of living crisis across a number of the other departments too. So aside from a £5.2 million overspend on temporary accommodation, like I said, in section 6, we are seeing financial pressures reported elsewhere. So I think it's section 5, which deals with children's services. So higher demand for children's social care, and we're not able to recover the high costs of providing for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and providing for them. And we're not able to recover those costs in full. The council's experiencing lower levels of debt recovery. And I think within that as well is still some of the lingering impacts of the pandemic, as in adult social care, the needs profile of residents, I think that's in section 11 for reference, is higher and a bit more complex than what they were seeing pre-pandemic, which obviously has cost implications in of itself. As I'm sort of going through the sections of the report, can I just mention a clarification? Because paragraph 5.5 talks about the household support fund and holidays and activity. I'd just like to clarify that decisions on the allocation of those funds are proposed to be made at the Cabinet meeting on the 1st of November, and the full report and papers for that are already in the public domain. So that is where those decisions are to be made. Just to return to the impact of inflation, and some of this has been mentioned already. We did start the year with contingency budgets against what was looking like a difficult year. As Comrade said, the funding settlement for the current financial year has not in any way turned out to be a real terms increase. And so those contingency budgets, we have allocated them. We've done that reasonably. We did that reasonably early in the year to make sure that managers could have the budgets to manage and spend appropriately against things like fuel costs, so thinking about SEND transport and energy costs, which I know the report mentions about the extra allocation made for the cost to meet the cost of street lighting, which are unavoidable costs that we had to react and meet. Another way that it's clear that the funding settlement we got was not a real terms increase in any way is when thinking about the pay offer and settlement. Now, the pay offer has been made, it's not yet been agreed, but we do know that at the sort of current level of pay offer, that would exceed the budget that we set. A £5 million increase to the pay budget across the council will it be about £3 million short of what's needed to honour that pay offer. And that's all to do with the high cost of inflation driving, understandably, of course, those pay demands through. So those pressures build up across the council, aside from the temporary accommodation, which, as Comrades just mentioned, does require, I think, a medium-term, significant actions across the medium term and widespread, perhaps multifaceted set of actions to tackle. And management across the council are committed to bringing the 2.6 million reported overspend down. And I think there's been an encouraging track record in previous years in the latter half of the year of finding mitigations, finding underspends. It's easier in the first half of the year to report the overspend and underspend, of course. Elsewhere in the report, we report on the capital programme, where spending and delivery on the capital programme is at a higher level than it has been in recent years, although it's approximately, I think, 38 million underneath the budget set, but still, compared to recent years, an encouraging sign. The HRA budget is on track, forecasting just a small minor overspend, and the DSG will meet its budget, which is forecast to meet its budget, which will have the impact of starting to reduce the high needs deficit that's been carried forward for a number of years now. I'll finish there and just sort of say that the recommendations are the report now.
Okay, thank you very much. My colleagues, a very sobering report, but for understandable reasons, not least in the area of temporary accommodation. This is a very fragile landscape that have been staved off for a period during COVID-19, when the government made interventions to not make it as easy for landlords to pose sort of risks for their tenants. But it's been unblocked, and now we're experiencing the impact of that. Obviously, noted the main pressures around the sustained demand in children's services and adult services. And obviously, in terms of the parking and traffic management income falling, this is due to lower rates of collection, which means people responding to the enforcement position and paying what they should be paying in time, I'm assuming, but it still doesn't distract from the sobering situation that we're facing. So I'm going to just open to questions specifically on the report from any member of Cabinet or the wider executive. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously to Councillor Rowley and to Conrad, it's clearly a very difficult financial position for all local authorities at the moment, and this is, as Chair has rightly said, a really sobering report as to the potentially quite difficult decisions that will have to be made at a later stage. I just wanted to probe, for the benefit of our understanding and any of the press and public as well, the position in the paper on reserves, Councillor Elliott. It says in 4.1 and 4.2 that we have begun to work with the finance services to identify long-held earmarked reserves, and that they're now appropriately being used to mitigate in-year pressures. I wondered, how long are we planning to rely on the use of reserves to mitigate those pressures? Because the difficulty that we're in is that it's not obviously a long-term financial position. So I wondered if either yourself or Conrad had a point at which maybe there's a guillotine on, if those in-year position pressures continue, we obviously can't use reserves indefinitely. So when does that sort of guillotine hit?
I'll say a few words and ask Conrad to come in. Clearly, as you heard Conrad and Andrew saying that these reserves were used for unavoidable. And we know in terms of what's happening with the inflation, with the cost of living, the fuel cost, energy cost, etc., that is all that's going to be used for. We were hoping to add 3 million to it this year, but clearly as a result of these unforeseen expenditure, that is not going to happen. And we just hope that when the government makes some further announcements on 17th, we will reevaluate the situation. But clearly, if the government does not offer anything tangible, then we collectively as a council will have to make some choices as to what is it that we can do within the amount that we have. That effectively means prioritizing different options. There are statutory services. There are other priority areas that we are currently working on. And those are the issues that we need to look at collectively once we have slightly better understanding of what the government is proposing to do. If what they are saying or what they said previously by the previous chancellor, that there's a fat in local government, which I hope the new chancellor understands that there isn't, and they come up with some meaningful proposals to fund local government. We are in this boat along with the rest of the local authorities. And clearly, LGA, London Council, we're all keeping an eye on what's happening nationally. And in light of that, we reevaluate our position, and it may lead to reevaluation of our medium-term financials, depending upon what we can afford. I don't know whether Conrad is to add anything.
Yeah, if it's okay, if I just add a couple of points to that. So you're absolutely right, Councillor Garfield. No responsible authority could plan for the long term or even the medium term on a strategy of just sort of continuing to use up reserve. One of the reasons you hold reserves is precisely to enable you to deal with short-term pressures. So no one plans to overspend in the current year, but given the extraordinary circumstances that again we're faced with, that's why we hold reserves in order to enable us to deal with that in year rather than immediately having to make knee-jerk decisions, perhaps to cut services. Budget strategy is still to continue to build up reserves to the required level. We are short of that at the moment, but I see no reason to change the overall advice, which is reasonable standard across the sector, that about 5% of that budget should be the target figure of reserves to aim for. And we're below that at the moment, and so we'll continue to need to find ways to add to that. I think the next sort of significant financial event for Newham, if you like, in terms of cabinet reporting, would be on the 6th of December, when we would ordinarily plan to bring a sort of draft budget. And clearly we will bring whatever we are able to at that point. I just need to emphasise a note of caution on that. If we get this sort of overall financial statement on the 17th of November, and unless that contains an unexpected level of detail, we're not going to know exactly how that translates down to the exact detail for Newham. So we will then need to update between December and February 23 when the budget is finalised, in order to keep Cabinet and colleagues aware of the changing position. I think we're just going to have to be sort of quite flexible over the current period. But for the avoidance of doubt, no, of course you're right. Other than in the very short term, which is exactly why you hold reserves, you could not plan to sort of continually run down reserves, and we should continue to build reserves up to the target level of around about 5% of the net budget.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, colleagues? Sarah?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and absolutely right. This is I don't think we've ever been in this sobering position before. It's taken, when I'm reading it, it's actually, for someone like me, a little bit frightening, because I think, oh my God, and genuinely, I think that our budget meetings that we're having as portfolio leads have been quite productive. It means that we are genuinely looking at our top 10 stuff, and I think that's very useful. But my question, before I'm told it has to be a question, I would quite like to understand more about temporary accommodation. So I understand we've got all these people in, but the nightly paid stuff, does that, so if we're, for example, if we are decanting or moving out people from Victoria Street, are we moving them into another accommodation, or are we moving them into hotels and stuff like that? And if we are, how long can we sustain that?
So, Chair, if it's okay if I can start an answer to that, and then as some of that also relates to housing policy, perhaps others might come in. But I mean, the general principle, of course, is that where we have accepted a duty to a family, then we must seek to provide housing to meet those needs. I don't think anyone suggests that nightly paid hotel accommodation is the best way of doing that. It's certainly not the cheapest. The issue is that within Newham, we have seen, and colleagues will have more exact figures than I on this, but we have seen a significant reduction in the amount of stock available for private letting, principally as landlords are looking to let at higher rates because that's what they can demand in the market. And as a consequence, the number of places that we have available to place homeless families in, is curtailed, and hence on far more occasions than we would like financially, and certainly far more occasions than those families would like. Sometimes that does therefore include the use, well, more than sometimes, that includes the use of non-paid hotel accommodation. It's right financially, and it's right, I'm absolutely sure, socially, that we should try and minimise that. And there are a number of activities going on, including acquisitions to boost supply, but that will take time. And I understand, although it's not my area of specialist expertise, an awful lot of work as well to try and sustain tenants, because again, it is far better for the families concerned, and also it's coincidentally better for us financially to sustain a tenancy rather than to have that family then placed into hotel or similar accommodation. So, there's a sort of twin track approach to try and deal with the problem, but we are being driven by some pretty significant market factors that are especially challenging to deal with. And I understand that is particularly the case in Newham, where we have seen, all London boroughs have seen a reduction in the stock available for letting. I understand that it's particularly the case in Newham because of the proximity to the city and other factors like that. The only other point I should add, just to go back to your sort of starting point about the report being sobering, I think it should be. I hope it is not frightening, but it certainly ought to be sobering. If it helps, I think it is important to emphasise, speaking to my colleagues across London and more widely nationally, there are lots of similar reports being written and presented. This is not a Newham problem. We will feel it, very acutely for a number of reasons, I'm sure. Many other local authorities are really starting to struggle as a consequence of the last 10 years and more of funding changes, and in particular, what is looking like a really tough circumstance and settlement. So, that doesn't mean that we can afford to relax or anything like that. Of course not. But it is just, I think, perhaps important to emphasise this is not a Newham only problem.
No. I fully understood that. I mean, I don't think we're an outrider at all. I suppose it just emphasises that. Although I just wonder whether we'll ever get to a position where we will only be able to deliver statutory services that we have to deliver. Is that on the horizon, or should I just stop thinking like that?
Well, we don't know the funding position from government, and although I've been, I think, realistic about the prospects for that, I emphasise again, we don't know We don't have the data on that. I would add in terms of statutory services, and I think it is an important way to think about the council's finances. Just because a service is statutory does not mean that the amount you spend on it is fixed. And I think it is quite important to emphasise that, efficiency and value for money cuts across everything that we do. It's not the case that you can just sort of neatly divide things up into statutory and discretionary. And, it's more complicated than that, particularly as well with, the impact of preventative. For instance, if just been talking about homelessness, some of the preventative stuff we do is not, strictly speaking, statutory, but it's a very good intervention for those families, and in anything except the very, very, very short term is also the right thing for us to do financially.
Thank you, Conrad.
I'm just going to bring in Dave on the Victoria Street and where we're at with that, albeit we're going to be coming to at some point scrutiny, and there's a response being provided to scrutiny with regards to Victoria Street. And if everyone recalls, the position on Victoria Street is to use Victoria Street to house families with children because it's wholly inappropriate and the accommodation is too small. And there are some corresponding strategies that we have corporately and as administration, one being happiness, the other one being, home standards and size, and the impact of homes that aren't fit for family type habitation and the impact that that has emotionally on families. But it's progressing well. Over to you, Dave.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Dave Hughes. I'm the Corporate Director for Inclusive Economy and Housing. So Councillor Rushing mentioned specifically Victoria Street. So just to clarify, the families who are currently housed or were housed in Victoria Street who don't want to live there, we are relocating, but we're not relocating them into hotels. They're going into other types of temporary accommodation. It's just referred to in the report as nightly, just because those properties, whether they be flats or houses, we record as nightly.
Okay.
So just to make that clear, that Victoria Street tend to not be moved into temporary accommodation, not be moved into hotel emergency accommodation. And as the Mayor said, we made the decision that Victoria Street isn't a suitable property for housing families, and consequently we have a programme to look at the options for either refurbishment or demolition rebuild for that block. And obviously we're doing the decamp process for families that don't want to live there, which is progressing well.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay, I've got a question from Councillor Neil Wilson, then I've seen Councillor Colleen Lee Parkway.
Yeah, thank you very much. Section 8 refers to the adults and health section, and the introduction, if I may, Chair, thanks very much, is to say that, there's been reduction in overspends in terms of where we were looking at care packages, reduced from 11 on overspends to 6, with a quite a detailed examination of review of commitments. A series of adjustments on another 4.3 million, reducing the remaining financial impact of that pressure. But I want to flag up, and I think it's something that's sort of another unknown of all the unknowns that we've talked about, that the government did announce, 500 million across the whole of England for, some hospital discharge, so that people were adequately moved at a suitable point away from acute hospital care into adult social care. But paragraph 8.7 and others does talk about manual forecasts for expected medium-term financial savings received from what is currently, was the CCG and is now going into a new landscape of integrated care partnerships and packages. I think what I'm really asking is, we've got in that same paragraph, by the way, that the whole, it's that same section, that the whole of the entire public health service reserve will be required to net offset budgetary pressures. This is in the context of reducing agency staff. Let's flagging up. We need, I think, to keep up our campaigning role within the new integrated care system landscape to ensure that there are resources for our NHS partners, as well as obviously adult social care. But the question is, do we have any firm end point of where that CCG money in homes of hospital discharge going into the new landscape? Because I sit on one of the levels of this new organisation. I think it's still up in the air, isn't it?
I think as far as if I may, Chair, I think as I recall from being on the CCG previously, there was a.
Oh,
Am I right?
No, there's a transition, isn't it?
That's right.
But the danger is that it'll be stagnant, and you know that it'll be a level which is not meeting, as in the rest of what's already been said. I think by both Andrew and myself in other arenas, that people are in the post-COVID era actually having more complicated long-term conditions. Therefore, the per capita cost of packages will increase. The danger is that we have historical formulation based on what was pre-pandemic rather than the reality of what's now the need for increased population and an increased elderly population with more long-term conditions. So I'm just flagging that there was another pressure on it.
No, I'd agree. I mean, it's always, I think it would be fair to say, a challenge in public finance to sort of try and keep reasonable balance so that the data on which distributions are based is kept reasonably current without sort of updating it every minute, as it were. Again, I think you're absolutely right. That's particularly challenging at the moment because a lot of that data hasn't been updated for a number of years anyway, and then COVID has seriously exacerbated that. So I think you're right. Unfortunately, all I can say in response to that, it is another of the many risks and uncertainties that we're carrying. I can't give any more definitive answer than that at the moment. We'll see some more on the 17th. Personally, I suspect it'll be a bit later than that.
Okay, I've got Councillor Carly Lee Parkway, then I'll come to Councillor Shaban Mohammed and questions, yeah? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Ali, and thank you, comrades, and Andrew, for your remarks. I think we're in an extremely worrying time for any local authority, and actually the financial situation that we face is going to be almost a bleak time in anyone's history. But I do just want to pick up a couple of things. So looking at the report that we have in front of us to consider today, it talks a lot about placements and the need for placements amongst whether that be children's services or adult social care. And what I do see is that there is the level of need is something that we need to really consider going forward in regards to any financial position we're in. I guess what I'm asking for is the level of assurity that actually not just our cabinet member for finance and our corporate director for finance, but actually us as cabinet members that gatekeep these budgets, that actually we're doing everything we possibly can to think about how we spend the public purse according to the level of needs of residents here. But I also do want to just pick up one point that I've raised in a different place. And I did hear Councillor Ali's remarks in the beginning and also Andrew's remarks in regards to this specific question I'm going to ask around 5.5. Speaks of options for utilising income from the Household Support Fund and the Holiday Activity Food Fund are being considered. If income is allocated, it will reduce the overspend position. I just want some assurities, if at all possible this evening, that is being looked at in regards to it not being that case. It's not being the first option, but obviously an option lastly to consider, as these families that receive these funds are some of our most vulnerable families here in the borough.
All right, before you answer,
Okay, so
I'm going to firstly ask, in terms of 5.5, there are, in my understanding, specific requirements that are set by government with regards to the Household Support Fund and the Holiday Activities and Food Programme that we are obliged to adhere to legally. Is that right?
That is correct, yes. And the report
Right.
on the 1st of November that deals with that is consistent with those legal requirements.
Okay, fine. So in terms of utilising the income from these two funds, any utilisation of income will have to adhere to those legal requirements as set by government, and there can be no deviation. Otherwise, the council will be operating outside of the law. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. I mean, there are a number of specific grants that local authorities receive, so we're very familiar with the framework of ensuring that when we spend against those, it is consistent with legal requirements.
And the principal target beneficiaries for both grants, there is no consideration that that expands to any other cohort of beneficiary household.
No, I mean, there's no suggestion of using this for some sort of, unrelated purpose or anything like that.
Right. So can you explain to all of us what is meant by utilising income and, if allocated, reduce the overspend position?
So the current forecasts include some expenditure already committed that has been used for purposes that would be consistent with the grant, i.e., those families. So the November report would enable you either to receive the whole of the new grant and allocate all of that in its entirety to new expenditure supporting that cohort. It would be legally possible to use some of that grant to cover expenditure that you have already incurred supporting families who have a need consistent with the grant. That would be legally permissible. The report in front of you tonight merely states that is mathematically the case. The 1st of November report sets out exactly how that grant is proposed to be allocated, and that can be considered in full at the Cabinet meeting next Tuesday.
So there's a Cabinet report that's been published already with regards to next month's Cabinet as it pertains to the holiday activities and food programme. And my understanding of what Conrad has said is, given the prescriptive nature of these funds, that in essence, the target beneficiary cohort of households, i.e. those most vulnerable, will benefit from this approach. Yeah?
Yeah, and I mean, if it's helpful, I can confirm from the November report what that...
I think that will be just helpful just to ensure that we've got a coherence with regards to this debate and that question and this section of the report, and then we can come back to it at the next Cabinet meeting, yeah?
Absolutely.
That will be really helpful.
So
It's wording.
It's wording.
So would it be helpful then? So taking the HAF fund first then, who is this programme for? And there are half a dozen bullet points requirements of the target group. And I'm just reading now, so apologies if I'm looking at the screen rather than at you. School-aged children from reception to year 11 inclusive who receive benefits-related free school meals. Council can also use up to 15% of the grant to provide free or subsidised provision for children who are not in receipt of benefits-related free school meals, but who are assessed as being in need, at risk or vulnerable. Other children eligible for this provision include, but are not limited to, 1, young carers, 2, looked after children or previously looked after children, 3, children with an education and health care plan, 4, children who have low attendance rates at school or who are at risk of exclusion, 5, children living in areas of high deprivation or from low-income households who are not in receipt of free school meals, including those who have no recourse to public funds, 6, children in transition phases between nursery and primary school or primary and secondary school. So, I mean, it's quite a broadly drawn set of criteria, I would suggest, but it's very, very clear from that who it is intended that the funding should be provided to.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, what section of that Cabinet report is there?
So that is 373 of the 1st of November Cabinet report.
3.7.3, yeah?
Page 138.
Page 130.
8.
Eight.
Sorry.
Okay.
I mean, it goes on to provide more detail about the minimum level of provision required and so on and so forth. But I think the section I've read out sort of demonstrates, what the purpose of those funds is quite clearly.
Just by way of assurance, I'll come to you in a moment. So that pertains to the holiday activities and food programme. On the household support fund,
I'm just trying to find the relevant reference in the report. So if you wouldn't mind giving me a moment on that.
I'm going to take Shabs first and then.
Yeah. I was just going to say on the temporary accommodation front, we have an acquisitions team, and it's a one council approach where we got short-term strategy and a long-term strategy, and we are working really, really hard with colleagues in finance, legal, and housing to actually increase supply. So hopefully next quarter we should see some of those acquisitions come into fruition. So it will help our financial position. So it will start, hopefully, fingers crossed, start bringing it down. So, I'm quite optimistic about what we've been doing. And this acquisitions team has been set up over the last 2 years to really look at temporary accommodation and increase. I mean, at the moment, it's a London problem. It's not just a new problem, it's a London problem. Supply is completely down for a lot of London boroughs, and they're struggling just as much as us to increase their temporary accommodation. So, I think we're doing the work there, and hopefully we're going to start getting some fruition from the hard work.
So I'm struggling in the meeting to find the details on the household support fund, but as a general assurance, as I say, grants like this are common in local authorities. They've been a feature of the funding environment for many, many years. So we're very familiar as an organisation, with, of course, the need legally to spend it on what it's supposed to be spent on and not spend it on something that it's not supposed to be spent on. And the systems and processes are in place to ensure that on each fund that happens. Sometimes these funds are very restrictive, sometimes they're pretty widely drawn and.
Yeah, and just really, again, but specifically with regards to the household support fund. So in previous periods when we've received household support fund as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been an element of the fund which we've been able to use for those vulnerable households that aren't explicitly referenced in the household support fund criteria. And similarly, the council tax rebate earlier this year, there was an amount that we had flexibility as a local authority with other local authorities that allowed us to apply it to households where the individuals are vulnerable because they may well be elderly but happen to live in a band class of property that would have disqualified them. And we applied that, and that helped an additional 1,000 or 2,000 elderly residents with that rebate. So it's a regular feature. So does that provide you?
Yes, absolutely, and I think it is about wording.
Okay, so in that spirit, I'm going to ask for the purpose of the minutes that question and the response is noted appropriately with the inclusion of the following. So where it says on big page number 27, 5.5, options for utilising income from the household support fund and the holiday activities and food programme considered. If income is allocated, this will reduce the overspend position. It was noted by Cabinet that an additional paper will be presented to Cabinet formally at its meeting on the 1st of November 2022 as it pertains to holiday activities and food programmes. And then open bracket, specifically section 3.73, close bracket, page 138, stop. Yeah,
Thank you.
okay. Anything you want to add?
What I would say, Chair, is thank you very much. I mean, we have a very competent and well-known Section 151 officer, and track record of this organisation is that we fully comply with the government grant conditions, and that we've never been in such a situation where we have used those resources for any other purpose. So the cabinet can be rest assured that the amount of money that are being spent here will be spent in accordance with the basis upon which they were allocated. Thank you.
Just one thing to add. The credentials of this amazing genius sitting over there, Mr. Conrad Hall, was never under doubt.
Nothing to do with me.
Shouldn't they do the genius?
Yeah, I'm going to, you said your comment, not a question.
All right.
I noticed that. Councillor Neil Wilson.
Yeah, mine was a combo. I think you've and so, yeah, it's the coupling together of something that was, time fixed, COVID grant and the COVID winter grant, the household support grant. That was made available in the last financial year, but it hasn't had this financial year with all of those parameters drawn up very clearly. It looks as if we're running two things together, and I think that separation and this discussion was next month's. Sorry, yes, it is next month. Next cabinet report on this is about housing. The HAP, whatever I'm calling it. The holiday activity fund, which has got different criteria reference, and I think it's been helpful to have that discussion.
Yeah.
We need to be clear with our residents and people watching this that, we're at the mercy sometimes of these grant programs for different criteria reference.
Yeah.
I was agreeing with you, really.
Okay, thank you very much.
Roundabout way.
All right, cheers. I just have a couple of additional questions. And then can I just see if there are any further questions that any members of Cabinet or the Executive wish to ask? Okay, so I noted section 4.3, the additional pressure in the forecast is the local strike action and the cost of collecting refuse during the strike action and other mitigating actions by the council. They're marginally offset by pay reductions, but will need to be fully funded by repurposing funds in earmarked reserves. How much are we looking at? And then secondly, I noted 4.4 around financial controls in an attempt to re-establish balanced position. And then on 4.5, further corporate financial controls will be required. What are those? What's being considered presently?
Shall I take
The first one.
It's the question on the mitigation cost in relation to the strike actions currently to date running at 1.5 million.
1.5 million?
That's correct.
That's in relation to 4.3?
Yes.
Okay.
Then, Chair, if I may, in terms of further management action, I mean, of course, that depends on how the financial situation evolves. Things that we can do, which are sort of operationally fairly simple to put in place, is just to restrict and further restrict and further restrict some more the authority of managers to sign off expenditure. So like any organisation, the more senior one is, the more authority one has to commit budgets. You can kind of temporarily withdraw that so that more expenditure is required to be signed off at a higher level in order to provide a greater level of scrutiny. And there are various other sort of practical steps like that that can always be implemented. I do want to emphasise, though, this is a kind of collective endeavour. If what we're doing is trying to stop people spending money by putting controls in place over it, because they're not, they're spending money to deliver services that matter. What really matters is that everyone in the organisation recognises the importance of this, and as has been described, the seriousness of the position. One should never want to spend public money other than on delivering important public services, and what we rely on above all is everyone in the organisation kind of really remembering the point that every penny saved. I know there are sort of cliches around this, but it is genuinely true. They do add up, and if we have lots of budget managers across the organisation, as we do in a large organisation, the small amounts each of those save really do add up actually to substantial sums. So there are more and more controls that we can put in place, and we will do if necessary. But I much prefer to work on the basis of all of our managers, doing even more to up their game. And they've done a really good job in the past. So you'll recall last year the pressure we were under as a result of the continuing costs of the pandemic and the shortfall in funding for that, and the steps that were taken by everyone across the organisation to deal with that. So I feel confident that we've got a good organisation to try and deliver on this. But all that communication about the position is increasingly important to drive that message home.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm going to suggest we just move straight on to the recommendations on bid page number 24. So for the reasons set out in the report and its appendices, Cabinet is asked to 3.1.1, note the report, the forecast overspend on the general fund and the management actions being taken to mitigate it. 3.1.2, note the MTFS savings tracker. 3.1.3, note the forecast positions on the DSG and HRA. 3.1.4, note the risk register, including mitigating actions. 3.1.5, note the forecast capital monitoring financial position. Are those all noted?
Noted.
Great, thank you very much. Right, so now we're going to be going to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 6. This is GLA funding contract and future affordable homes for Newham programme. And I'll say a few words, pass over to Councillor Siobhan if you'd like to say a few introductory remarks as well, because it's a joint paper that both he and I share, and this relates to our affordable homes for Newham programme. As you'll all be aware, in term 1, we were allocated the highest grant provision by the GLA under the auspices of the Mayor of London's Affordable Home for Londoners grant, and that helped us accelerate our 1,000 homes at social rent levels delivery. So by way of our ongoing commitment to drive forward municipal house building, we began to work towards putting in a bid for the next wave of GLA funding. And back in March last year, we approved the GLA bid for 550 homes under their 2021 and 2026 programme. That will help us expand our affordable homes for Newham programme itself. And the bid was submitted and further negotiations took place, and we finally secured £92 million to develop 500 social rent homes plus 50 London living rent homes for the residents of Newham. And then essentially this paper seeks authority to enter into a consortium agreement with the GLA to secure the grant allocation. And the new allocation will be jointly delivered by the council's in-house community wealth building place team, as well as Popular Living, in a similar way to what's happened in that first wave of 1,000 homes that are in the delivery pipeline and have all started. And to facilitate this, a joint award agreement will be entered to between both parties. And then the paper, please do note, allocates a capital budget of £173 million. You heard that right, £173 million, in addition to fund the in-house team proportion of the allocation. And as you'll note in the paper, officers are currently exploring a range of sites before finalising the programme, and the report seeks delegated authority to finalise this once further due diligence has been undertaken, and this is in line with the diligence framework and the good governance framework that we apply across our Affordable Homes for Newham programme, which comprises of a number of things, including monthly meetings that are attended by both myself as the portfolio lead for inclusive economy and housing delivery, Councillor Shabal Mohammed as the cabinet member for housing services, and also the cabinet lead for finance and resources in this instance, Councillor Zulfikar Ali. And the other features of this report of note is that the paper seeks delegated authority also to appropriate sites that will form the final programme for planning purposes, and then post-development appropriately to direct them for housing provision purposes. And you'll note in the paper that there's been consultation on this particular cabinet paper prior to its formal publication. On that note, I'll hand over to Councillor Shabal Mohammed.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to say, really, really good piece of work. Really glad that we're getting this money, and it's good. It's a good news story for us, because at the end of the day, we are building. Wherever you go around the borough, it's not private developers, it's actually council stock. And this housing is life-changing, because, you know, me and the mayor do meet the residents going into these properties, and it makes a real difference. That social rent is life-changing to a resident, to a single mum who wants to go out and work and provide for her children. So it's really making a real difference, and really proud that I can go around the borough and actually tell residents. And when I talk to residents, you know, and I actually tell them sites where we're building, and even some of, you know, our sites that we're looking at currently in Leys Road and stuff like that, the consultation that we do with the residents, the feedback we get, it's always been really positive. And, you know, the first thing the residents say, you know, good news, derelict land, you know, and it's amazing. And I'm really glad that, you know, finally, you know, we're getting some more money to deliver much needed housing and, you know, passive housing. And I just really want to thank Chris and Darren, especially Chris, for all the hard work his team do. And I do go to a lot of those consultations, and we do meet the residents. So really glad, and it's a good piece of work. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, Chris, would you like to, or Dave?
They're on the screen.
Hand over to Chris. Chris Holland, who's the project lead on this programme for the Affordable Homes programme. Just on me.
Good evening, County Mayor. So Chris Holland, head of delivery. The only thing I'd like to add is...
We can't hear you, Chris.
Can you hear me now?
No.
Not really.
Chris, you're in the room.
You sound muffled, Chris, so I don't know whether or not you can move closer to the speaker on your laptop, albeit I appreciate that may not be a good look.
I'm probably as close as I can get to. Maybe it's a bad connection. Can you hear me now?
1 second.
1 second.
It's our end. We're so sorry.
Resident IT technician will deal with it.
Can you hear me now? Any better? Good evening, Cabinet. The only thing I'd like to add is that both ourselves and Popular have got a real momentum behind us, and actually this extra GLA money, along with the council budget, will enable us to just basically move ahead in a seamless basis to start delivering more homes. So we've already started a lot of due diligence on the long list of sites as part of the paper, and we're in a position now where probably the next couple of months we can finalise what those schemes are going to be in the programme. So there'll be a seamless move from phase 1 GLA programme to phase 2, and so there won't be any sort of stopgap between delivery, so we can actually deliver this second phase of development more quickly to the residents of Newham. We're looking forward to delivering that, and hopefully you're able to support the paper tonight. Happy to answer any questions you've got on the paper.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, are there any questions? I've got Councillor Neil Wilson, then I can see Councillor Sarah Ruiz. Questions?
Yeah, 816 refers to complement this paper. Popular Living will seek further cabinet approval, because I think if I heard you right last night at another event, and also today, Chris, that this is in tandem, that they're dealing mainly with the bigger developments, and this is more about where we've got say, the garages or the famous New Park Street housing office site with about 4 properties on. And the indicative list is shown at the end. That I think we do need to ask the question whether that will be circulated in terms of, other ward colleagues and all the rest, because we do get residents asking what's happening. Sometimes we don't get the boards up and all of those issues that Popular are better at. So I know it's still in early stages. So 2 questions really, Chair. Thanks again. When is it coming back for Popular so that we can get this sort of tandem working of this, or are the 2 separate processes? And 2, are we going to make certain that once we've identified sites, because it's only an indicative list we've got here, that the public and ward councillors particularly know if there's a notice up, it would help sometimes what's happening.
I think what we're going to try and do, we will start that engagement work, like Leys Road. We did engage with the local ward councillors. They did turn up and met the residents. So we want to continue that progress and make sure, like I said, I think that engagement work, that consultation work is vital to, I think last term, if you look at a lot of our residents, they were feeling like it's all private development, Popular with private company, and we need to get that message out there. And even with the Affordable Homes programme, I think that messaging is key, that we start telling our residents what we're doing, and it is council stock, it is council housing, it's social housing. And I think, that we've started that progress, and I think what we've done with Leys Road, it's a continuation. So wherever we identify sites, we are going to make sure that consultation, putting notes out to ward councillors to attend those meetings, engagement meetings, talk to the residents, and also some sites might be co-production. So, once we start looking at regeneration sites or near regeneration sites, we're going to have to start doing some co-production work, especially on some of our community centres that we're identifying to add housing capacity on. So that co-production is going to be vital in that delivery.
So in addition to that, what we can do, once we've actually finalised the sites going into the programme, we can either, as part of a cabinet paper going back at the same sort of time, add that in as a final list of the schemes as part of the programme, or if that's not pertinent, we can actually circulate to cabinet a list of the final programme sites. And in addition to that, we'll make sure we contact every ward member who's got a site within their ward as well at the same point in time.
Yep, is that okay? Right, okay.
The question about Popular, when is it coming back? Does it come back at regular intervals? I think that's the answer, Dave, isn't it?
So it will be subject to the amount level.
Yeah,
and it will come back, but then there are regular updates to Cabinet with regards to the affordable homes based on scheme by scheme. So it will be subject to the value amount of each scheme. But over the last 4 years, virtually, all the packages and parcels, virtually every single one, I can't actually think of anyone that hasn't come to Cabinet. So that's part of the governance process. Okay, I've got Councillor Sarah Rivers.
Yeah, so yes, great work on the Leys Road consultation. I don't think I've ever been in a consultation whereby the residents are almost unanimous in favour of what's going to happen. So it's really helpful to start that. Totally agree with Neil on the, I think they're called hoardings. If we don't get them up, we've got sites in Custom House where we'll have built the new houses before the hoardings go up. And that's not your fault. Take that gavel away from her. But at our corporate parenting board last week, both Carleen and I were asked yet again to whether or not we could have some form of, whether it's, and I don't think we can agree tonight, but we might be able to, is about whether we could have a percentage of all of our new developments whether they could be allocated to our care leavers. You know, it doesn't have to be like half the building, but if there was 1 or 2 flats in each development, instead of us having to offer them substandard accommodation in places like Annick Road, they actually would have a new flat.
I'm hoping that the substandard Annick Road isn't council property because it shouldn't be substandard. But I think this is something that we need to take offline and discuss because it will link to the legally framed allocations policy. And I'm not entirely sure whether we can specify specific sites that might breach duties.
Fine, we just said we would raise it.
Okay, thank you very much for raising. And you've got multiple opportunities to raise it in other forums as well.
Yeah, but it's public here.
Yeah.
Right, listen.
But there are other public.
I know.
Yeah. And you do know that everything you say is listened to.
Yeah.
What I was just going to add, I think, you know, we can look at sites where we've worked with you, where, you know, the one council approach, we work children's services. So maybe we can look at other sites. I know we've done a great piece of work in Canetown.
Yeah, we have.
Add to that and look at sites where we can develop and make them exclusive for care leavers like we've done in Canetown.
Okay. I don't know, Joy, if there is a hand up of Darren Levy behind me, because I can't see.
No.
I don't know whether Darren Levy wants to answer or respond to any of the questions, because we are listening and acting on the cases. I couldn't resist.
So just to pick up Councillor Rose's point, that's been fed back to me as well. So we're just looking at how we can build it into the allocation strategy for some.
There you go, see? Listen and action.
And action.
Okay.
No more than I would expect, Darren.
Okay. Right. I've got Councillor James Asser.
So mine was just quickly, I mean, I following on from what Councillor Lewis said about locations. The stuff that's come through so far has been very good in terms of looking at open spaces and the kind of quality of kind of regeneration area as well. Councillor Lewis mentioned Leys Road, which sits alongside existing allotments, which I know there's a lot of interest from the holders there. Just as kind of, I know there's been a lot picked up in terms of new kind of green spaces, but just to make sure as we go forward that there's a kind of proper link and how these things fit together with existing green spaces and how they can enhance it and kind of work with existing plots and spaces to both enhance them. And I think that is both a benefit for people moving in, but also the existing communities. And I know a lot of work's been done on that, but I kind of put it here as a kind of public plea, just as a reminder, because I think it's useful.
Okay.
Could have a city farm in
a question, Ian? Is there a question?
There was
No.
a request.
Okay, a request. Okay, I'm going to just seek some advice from Darren and Mark about the request. Shall we pick this up outside of this meeting, or do you have any initial views? So I'm going to obviously be subject to a good governance approach.
Noted, and obviously engaging with councillors, particularly at corporate priorities around open space and how this space is a priority. So certainly, Councillor Asser, any of the sites that are in your ward, we will certainly be engaging with you about how the sites relate to open space and children.
Okay, there you go. See, listening and action. Take it outside.
It was quite a good one.
Right, okay. I'm going to suggest that we just move on to the recommendations, which you can see listed from 2.1 and then all the way through to 2.1.7 across pages 89 big and big page number 90, and then also as part of the recommendations, Cabinet is asked to note that officers bring forward reports to Cabinet on construction contract procurement at the appropriate time within the programme. Projects developed by Popular Living report seeking authority to enter an agreement for lease transfer of council land to authorise loan funding for the developments and approving transfer of completed properties will also be brought to Cabinet at the appropriate time. So colleagues, do we all agree?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. And we are now going to be moving on to agenda item 7, which is the Canning Town and Custom House refurbishment project on big page number 107 to 126. So I am going to hand over to Councillor Shaban Mohammed.
Thank you, Chair. This report.
Oh, sorry, 1 minute.
It is.
Sorry, apologies. 1 minute, I've just looked at the wrong.
Is you?
Go ahead.
It is me. Thank you, Chair. This report relates to the procurement of contracts for the refurbishment works to properties situated in the Canning Town and Custom House regeneration. I just want to thank Councillor Sarah Ruiz and Mayor Fiaz for the hard work they have done in the stakeholder engagement. So, you know, I think you guys have been doing it over the last 4 years, looking up our stock and really doing that co-production with the residents, addressing the real issues of disrepair. The planned works to the properties will improve the fabric of the buildings and internal conditions of tenanted properties, and will ensure that properties remain safe and inhabitable until future regeneration programmes are implemented, subject to the ballot. The properties forming this programme are situated over the last 2 years. We have already carried out extensive work to the estates, including new door entry systems, general building repairs to address the historic lack of investment in the housing stock. In addition, we have refurbished a number of legacy voids to be used as temporary accommodation where tenants have been decanted in lieu of pending regeneration. This is about improving the quality of housing and also investing in the community. The properties forming this programme are situated further set out in Appendix 1. The properties were surveyed by John Rowland and Partners and were assessed of needing substantial refurbishment. The works are essential to prolonging the life and the fabric of the blocks, as well as maintaining the safety of the properties and residents preventing further cost to reactive repairs. We aim to procure free contracts, approximately £2 million, and to undertake refurbishment works in a way of call off from the procurement hub property works. Also, successful bidders, we're going to make sure that they allude to the London living wage. So any contracts we give out, making sure that they pay their staff a London living wage. Each contract will be for works which will include structural repairs, roof repairs, replacement, internal refurbishment works, including bathroom, kitchen upgrades to tenanted properties, windows, door replacement, ventilation improvement, heating upgrades, electrical repairs. The contracts will be formed part of works that is proposed to enable the council to maintain their properties to a lettable standard and deliver commitment to ensuring to its residents. The funding has been identified and will be within an allocated budget capital programme. It's anticipated the cost of the programme, cost of works will be in the region of £6 million. It's also anticipated the programme of works will commence in April 2023 with works completed by December 2023. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any questions?
Questions?
Question, can we not?
Thanks, questions? I'm open.
No, it's not allowed. Right, this is not a debating chamber, this is a debating chamber. Questions? Right, okay.
Thank you. I think it's lunch due. Well done to everyone who involved.
That's a comment.
Process here. It's about there's a recommendation not to charge leaseholders. I'd like to know what the rationale is.
Okay, Mark?
Sorry, no, Chair, through the chair, could I ask Darren to come in on that?
All right, Aaron?
So just to confirm, that's because the estate is potentially subject to a ballot on wider regeneration, so that it isn't possible to be able to commit to the longevity of those buildings. The total impact is around 150,000 of capital recharge of the 6 million. So that would be part of the recommendation, because if we were to go to tribunal and there's potential regeneration, we think it would be a risk.
Okay, is that all right? Any other questions, colleagues? Okay, so I am going to be asking everyone to note the recommendations on big page number 108 from 2.1 to 2.1.3. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm very thankful.
thank you very much. And well done to the team.
Yeah, well done.
And well done, Shav. And then we're now going to be moving over to agenda item 8. And this is the compulsory purchase of remaining leaseholders at James Riley Point. And as everyone's aware, this is in relation to the 23-acre site known as Carpenter's Estate, which is going through a remarkable restoration and regeneration programme that received an overwhelming endorsement by 73% of those residents that had the right to vote, including those that have a right to return, voted in favour of the master plan proposals last December. And as part of us marshalling our efforts to finally transform that estate for our people and deliver even more affordable homes at social rent levels, I'm going to invite Councillor Shabal Mohammed to talk.
Thank you, Chair. The refurbishment of James Riley Point is the first phase of the Carpenter's Estate Master Plan. The project has planning consent and subject to a 106 agreement. The contractors have been procured to start work once the vacant possession has been achieved. However, despite substantial negotiations with the remaining leaseholders, the council has still not reached an agreement to buy back their property. These negotiations continue, but we need to maintain the progress on the delivery of these new homes to help address the housing crisis in Newham. Also, the Cabinet is recommended to agree that the arrangements for the leaseholders, temporary relocation and disturbance compensation and delegated authority to the Corporate Director for Inclusive Economy and Housing Delivered to enter into final contracts with the remaining leaseholders. If the contract negotiation cannot be concluded by the 12th of December 2022, Cabinet is recommended to agree the Council to begin to prepare a compulsory purchase order application. And if we were to move forward to progress the CPO, the final application would come back to for agreement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Joshua Garfield, Councillor Joshua Garfield. Sorry.
Either or works for me. I just wanted to point out that as councillor, I'm afraid on page 1 there is a minor error in that Stratford and Newtown sadly no longer exists, and it is just Stratford Ward now.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Gold star for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to build on that, Dave and Darren and Mark, if we could just make sure colleagues in Inclusive Economy are alert to the boundary review. Okay, it's okay. Right, are there any other questions?
No.
No, okay, so can I just draw your attention to the recommendations, big page number 129, from 2.1 all the way to 2.1.7. Are we agreeable to all of that?
Agreed.
Great, thank you very much. And then we're now moving on to what I think is going to be the final agenda item. So this is the procurement to ensure continuity of essential public realm services during periods of industrial action. and I will be inviting Councillor James Asser to talk to this report, and then we've also got the corporate director, the wonderful Jamie Blake, alongside other officers, Helen Dennis in particular.
Come on. Oh, I was waiting, I didn't get a nod. Okay, I wasn't sure she'd finished. Okay, yes, so this is, people will be aware, we've had some, obviously a difficult period in terms of industrial action in the bin service. Not an isolated one in terms of industrial action across the country. People are aware we're in a very difficult time with workforces facing increased pressure due to the cost of living crisis, and in particular in local government and number and public sector having a long period of pay freeze and of course financial squeeze in terms of the budgets available. We've obviously been in long discussions with the union to try and resolve this, and the national pay settlement has been out to consultation. People will be aware that pay agreements are through collective bargaining and national agreement. We hope that will be processed in short order. We don't have any industrial action at the moment, but there is still potential for future strikes. As part of that process, we do have a number of things we have to continue to do to maintain health and safety, in terms particularly around protection in blocks of flats where piles of waste could risk fire risk, but also things like protecting people who rely on clinical waste services. This report brings forward a number of things that we've already been doing, but we obviously have to be prepared for any future industrial situation, including things around the bring sites we've been using to allow residents to remove waste to avoid build-ups on the streets. So this is a continuation of potential of those sort of works in case we do have future industrial action. Again, we hope that through negotiations at ACAS and through the national pay deal, we'll be able to resolve those and the deal we put on the table, but we have to be in preparation in case further incidences do occur, and that's where this brings us to. So it's not bringing anything that we haven't already seen, but it's about maintaining a service and about that balance out while we try and get to an accommodation with the trade unions. Jamie, if wants to add anything at that point.
I think if I might, the only thing I'd add is that we had a positive meeting, officers had a positive meeting with the street cleansing local representatives today, which we will hope will move into a wider discussion next week. And as Councillor Asser has already mentioned, we hope to get back to ACAS around the table with the refuse representatives at the latter part of next week. So an offer has again gone out to them via ACAS, and we're just waiting to hear back. There is an ongoing strike ballot for the street cleansing staff, which is due to be reported back to us on the 1st of November/Tuesday. Form cabinet fully put in place.
Okay. Are there any other questions, colleagues? No?
Well, only, yeah, if I might, I just think that once the pay award has been fully notified and we pay, actually that could go somewhere. That's, I think it's currently, is it 9.9% or something?
It's a flat rate, which is £2,229, which is the offer that's on the table, which includes London waiting. That represents for the refuse staff somewhere between 7.7 and 9.9%. For the majority of the street cleansing staff, for a scale 3, that will be the higher end of that, so in the 9.5 to almost 10%. So it does vary. We've got a range of staff in my area that are between scale 3 and scale 5 and 6.
But that should certainly
I would certainly help
to ease the situation
with the discussions.
Okay, is that helpful?
Very helpful, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, so I can't note any other questions. So I'm going to ask if we can just go straight to the recommendations, page number 206, and then they go over to page number 207. So all the way through to 2.4. Do we agree?
Agreed.
Agreed. That's an agreement for everyone. Thank you very much, colleagues. We've now concluded today's formal business of Cabinet, can I just ask if any colleagues have a hard copy of today's Cabinet report, please take them away with you or give them to Joy to dispose of, because there's some sent appendices. And I will be, just want to make one comment. As you know, it's the auspicious Hindu festival of Diwali, and I just wanted to, on behalf of all the Cabinet here, myself, and all colleagues at Newham Council, including our great Chief Executive, Colin Ansell, wish all members of our Hindu, Sikh, Jain and Buddhist community a wonderful Diwali celebration in these 5 days. And on that note, enjoy the rest of your evenings. Take care.